joint meeting of the Parks and Finance Committees. I'm Councilor Green. I'm joined by Councilor Hogan, Councilor Driscoll, Councilor Paniagua. And the reason we're here today is I think we all agree that sidewalks and trees are both city assets that are important, that make a big difference to quality of life in Syracuse. Historically, the context has been that sidewalks have been paid for by the property owners. So when there's been trees that have uprooted sidewalks or damaged sidewalks, the city, in my opinion, and then others have taken a pretty conservative approach to removing the tree in order to make sure the sidewalk could be put down in a safe manner. But with the municipal sidewalk program, now the city owns both sidewalk and the trees. So it gives us the flexibility to implement policies that give us a more flexible approach to maintaining trees, saving trees. So we wanted to get everyone together and talk about how we can go about doing that. So Corey, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Councilor. Neil Burke, the star of the show, just went to go grab a mask, so he'll be right back. But I just wanted to thank the councilors for having this committee meeting, giving us an opportunity to share some of our insight and the ongoing policies that we have related to sidewalks and trees. So just as a quick overview, we can advance the slide. So just a quick agenda. So I'm going to provide just a, one slide overview of the municipal sidewalk program, and then we will get into the meat of the issue with sidewalks and trees, and then we'll open it up for any questions or concerns. So just as a reminder, the municipal sidewalk program went into effect July 1st of this year, and the goals of the program, obviously is to prioritize sidewalk replacement where it's most needed, driven by the data that we work on with SMTC about where pedestrian traffic is, where it's most dangerous for folks to be walking in the street. And so, the municipal sidewalk program really allows us to plan in advance to make sure that we're spending those resources where they're most needed. The other goal was obviously to more equitably distribute the cost of the sidewalk replacement. This is built on the foundation that sidewalks are a public good, that we all use them and we should all pay equally into the system. Obviously, the opportunity to build on our existing networks with installing some new sidewalks, and in the sidewalk legislation, there is a percentage of the funding that will be put into new sidewalks each year. Alternatives for sidewalk repairs, which I think Neil will get into a little bit because that certainly helps to minimize the impact on trees. And then I really just wanted to make the point as we head into winter that the municipal sidewalk program gives us the opportunity to continue expanding our supplemental sidewalk snow removal program, but property owners are still responsible for clearing snow and ice from their sidewalks. The municipal sidewalk program in its first year is not going to clear snow from every single sidewalk in the city. The municipal sidewalk program, as is in the legislation, as we mentioned at the time, it allows us to continue to expand the supplemental sidewalk snow removal program. So, we will continue to build on it. Probably within the next few weeks, we'll be presenting to the council about what our proposed plan is for this year. The bid just went out for the county this morning. But people are still responsible for clearing snow from their sidewalks. We will continue to build on the network that we've established, but this does not absolve people. The city's not going to come through every single residential area and clear snow from their sidewalks. I just want to make sure that's clear because I think some of the coverage in the media at the time of the municipal sidewalk program approval by the council muddled some of that messaging. And so I just want to take the opportunity every chance I get to make that clear because I think there is some confusion on that.
Do we have a map for this year?
We do, yes. We're just finalizing right now. I think Neil, probably within the next week or so, we can be sharing that with council, just in terms of what the map's going to look like. So as many councilors know, the first year we started with, I think it was 20 miles of, which I think, double was about 40 miles. Then the following year we did, it's like 60, yeah. And then, obviously COVID impacted everything. But this year, our goal is to do about 100 miles of clearing miles of sidewalk. So that's the goal. We'll be sharing the map within the next week or so. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to make that clear because I think there is some understandable confusion from the residents' point of view as to the municipal sidewalk program and the way in which it impacts sidewalk snow removal.
What is is there an ultimate goal? Do you guys are like at 150 we cut off or 200 we cut off, or is the goal to really get to whole city?
The goal is to really build. There are certainly, some debate internally whether or not, we should move to a full citywide program. But, our goal as of right now is to continue building on the network. And so, there are a lot of streets that pedestrians still walk on that we want to get to clearing. And so I think that's kind of the goal, is that we'll just continue to build on it each year. And it's relatively significant, the amount of miles that we're able to add each year. So this year, I think we'll be targeting things like, the Empire State Trail. Thank you to New York State for giving us brand new sidewalks up and down Erie Boulevard. Areas where it's obviously, that it's very dangerous for pedestrians to be walking in the street on Erie Boulevard. So that's kind of a no-brainer. But the goal as of right now is just to continue building onto that network.
So when's it going to start this year?
When's it going to start? I mean, the first snowfall, hopefully. If we don't get it soon. I mean, the bid is out, so I think that should be back to us in a couple weeks. And it's obviously different than the RFP process, so we should be able to secure the contractor a lot sooner than we did through the RFP process. So, hoping it that we don't have significant snowfall, which again, the program is triggered at 3 inches. So hopefully we don't get a significant snowfall before then, but we're moving this forward as quickly as we can.
So who makes the determination what sidewalks are cleared, what routes
So we're driven by the data that we receive from SMTC with their pedestrian model in terms of where pedestrian traffic is the highest, and also the place in which it's most dangerous for pedestrians to be walking the street. For example, I know the first year, Euclid is a huge corridor for pedestrian traffic. Euclid didn't make the cut the first year because there are streets that have high pedestrian counts that it's more dangerous for folks to be walking in the street than Euclid. But the second year, Euclid did make it in there, and in part because of the help from SU, we were able to expand the pedestrian traffic because they were covering some of it. It allowed us to expand the trails in other neighborhoods.
see the determination, so it's basically on pedestrian activity, more or less.
Correct.
See, the situation that I get questioned on quite a bit is that there's some routes where there's a lot of pedestrian activity, but the people on those routes, the commercial people on those routes, have the resources to clear their own sidewalks. And why are we plowing their, I'm specifically talking about West Genesee Street.
Sure. I mean, when we launched the supplemental sidewalk snow removal program, our goal was for pedestrians, regardless of who owned that sidewalk in front of that property. The goal was to clear the sidewalk. So we didn't want to do kind of a patchwork and, we're going to clear either one of these blocks because those are residential. We're not going to clear the commercial, and we're going to hope that those businesses clear there. And if they don't, then we can pursue them and we can ticket them, and we can, it was just the priority of the program is pedestrian safety. That's the priority, regardless of who owns the property in front of that sidewalk. The only way to guarantee that the sidewalk gets cleared is if we do it, and we want to prioritize pedestrian safety. That's the goal of the program.
Well, you understand the perception then,
Right.
obviously. I have people saying,
Sure.
We have an 85-year-old woman up the street who can't shovel her own sidewalk, but yeah, you have like these car dealers on West Genesee Street that don't plow their sidewalks in the city, that plows them for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say property owners remain responsible. This is a supplemental program. So, if you've got a walkway, if your sidewalk is wider than we're able to clear, if you've got a walkway from your sidewalk to your business, you're still responsible for all of that. This program is supplemental. It's the same way it works in Rochester. The property owner's primarily responsible, and this is a supplemental program. I understand the frustration, and I think, as the program continues to grow and we continue to build on the network, we hope to get to more and more of those properties, but we didn't want to distinguish who owns in the same way that we, the priority there is the pedestrian. We want to clear the sidewalk. We don't want to have to distinguish between who owns this property and who owns this property in front of the sidewalk. We just want to get it cleared. But I understand the argument.
Yeah, maybe there's some way we can
Sure.
rectify the situation.
Sure. Okay, so finally, the last part of it is just to minimize the impact of sidewalk installation on our tree system, which is what brings us here today. So I am going to throw the presentation to my colleague, Neil Burke.
Good afternoon, members of the council. Neil Burke, Department of Public Works. We are clearly here to talk about sidewalks and trees, so we're going to dive into some of the specifics, but also just want to go over a broad overview of this first and foremost. So some of the things we're going to cover today are popular topics that may have come to you, things like ramping up and curving around trees where they exist, doing everything we can with additional materials, trying new and novel practices to make sure that if a street tree is there and it's the right tree in the right place, we'll do everything we can to retain it. We want to grow our urban canopy. We want to maintain what canopy we already have. But if we do have to remove a tree, we will take steps to replace it. So it's tough to do when you have an 80-year-old mature street tree that has to come down because for one reason or another it's in the wrong place. But we want to do everything we can to mitigate those efforts up front so that the end result is that the fewest amount of trees are disturbed. Some of the things that we have been looking at, again, ramping up and curving around trees. We're looking at different novel ideas regarding expansion joints in different forms when we're pouring. One very hot ticket item is things like temporary repairs. So one of the major disturbances to our street trees are the fact that when a sidewalk needs repair, we only have one option really in place, and that's we go in, we take it all out, we pour a new sidewalk. There are other approaches that can be evaluated. We've been discussing with our partners down the thruway here in Rochester to see what they do. We'll get into that a little bit more later, but it's important to remember that our current toolbox is pretty limited because we haven't had this municipal sidewalk program up until right now. So we've only had one tool in our toolbox. And the goal is to grow that toolbox as much as we can. Some of the other ideas are removing and replacing only the concrete. You don't disturb the stone below. You leave those roots in place. Again, that's leaning more towards a temporary type repair. It's not going to be the 50-year repair that we've gone for in the past. And then there's other issues related to the grades, making sure that we're meeting ADA standards. Even if we do try something new, even if we do want to retain that tree, we still have to be beholden to the law of the land, which are certain measurements for slope and cross slope that we have to meet for the Americans with Disabilities Act.
You want me to advance the slide or?
Yeah, the slide.
Carry on. And I'll add later.
So I think this is one of the ideas that brought us here today. There's been some speculation that we should just be curving every sidewalk everywhere there's a tree. And while that is a good approach in some areas, it helps us avoid the critical root zone of many of the trees. It's not always a one-size-fits-all solution, and nor do we want sidewalks that are constantly weaving in and out. But it is a tool that we want to bring to our toolbox. We've tried it in the past. Sometimes it works. You'll hear from Steve, a lot of it depends on the type of tree. And we have curved sidewalks in the past to accommodate street trees, but the tree still had to be removed because it didn't make it. So this is just one more tool we want to add to our toolbox, and it's one we've tried in the past and we want to get a little bit better on. The other idea here is ramping up. So doing what we can to leave roots in place. This, I mentioned it earlier, gets towards the temporary repair approach. Something like this was given to us by our friends in Rochester. They left the trees in place, they left the stone in place, they essentially poured a little bit more concrete, changing the grade a bit to leave those roots in place. One thing that you don't see discussed here in any of this is what are the impacts on drainage? You know, is this ADA? What are the impacts to driveways? So all of those things have to be taken into account. It's not as if any one of these tools is applicable anywhere, especially this one. This is very tricky, but it is something we want to learn more from our partners on. And these are just some more novel ideas. You know, we have issues. We've had issues in the past with repair. As it passes through driveways, it takes a bit of time for that concrete to cure before we can go in and finalize our repairs on the cutbacks to the apron in the driveway, and that's where we hear a lot of friction. We get a lot of static from residents on. So we want to do better about messaging around these issues. So if we are coming through your block and we're doing the entirety of the sidewalk through driveways, we want to make sure that the messaging is on point so that you know, okay, I'm going to have restricted access in and out of my driveway for a few days. That's another thing we want to get better at. But also, the picture to the left is another one from our friends. New and novel ways of working with trees. In the past, for us, a tree like that probably would have been replaced. That probably would have been taken out and needed to be replanted. There are options like adjusting the formwork. I believe they're using a piece of felt or an expansion joint around the roots, and not to get too technical, it's strange, it's kind of quirky, but if it works for our neighboring municipalities, we want to evaluate that here too. And this is, we got into this a little bit. We only want to take out what we have to. So if the sidewalk is still good, we want to retain that. The less disturbance, the better in terms of retaining our tree canopy, respecting our tree canopy. So if we come through a street and only 25% of those concrete flags need to be replaced, we will retain the other 75% if they're in good condition. And we'll only take out what we have to. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Steve quickly so he can touch on a few of the items that we're working through. But I want to reiterate the fact that Public Works, between myself, our inspectors, as well as the engineering department, we work closely with forestry. We work closely with Steve, cluing him into all of these discussions, all of these decisions that need to be made, either himself or a technician.
I just want to add a couple things. First of all, in my time here, especially as time has gone on, I would say that we work very well collaboratively. Sidewalk engineer with Neil, with Chris, with engineering. We don't always agree on how to do things, but we all have the same intent, which is to solve the problem. And when we decide to remove trees, it's driven by how much root loss happened. That's the equation. So the more root loss that goes on, the more likely we have to remove the tree. And so it's how to minimize that. We've been doing things one way for a long time. And that is making sure that there's an 8-inch horizon that is free of tree root. And to go from the way we've been, it's reflected in our contract language, in our practice, in our understanding, in our contractor's understanding, to go from that to something that we showed is just, we'll have to work our way toward that. That is certainly our goal. I don't think there's anyone here that wakes up and says, I want to remove some trees unnecessarily. But we do bear the liability of any tree we leave standing. So, public health and safety is always our foremost concern. I feel confident as we go through and work on this that we're going to get better at it. We're always going to be refining the tool, refining our process, and improving our options. But here we are, ground zero, trying to build this new program. And so we're going to explore all these things, understand how they work for us, understand how we'll have to change things the next year. That's my general take on it.
Steve, what do we have in terms of reporting or asset management? Like, how are you able to track how many trees come down or how many come up, and what do we have available now?
That's very easy. We have a database of all the trees that is kept up to date on a regular basis, and we know how many trees we remove for sidewalk curb.
Is that something you could share with us?
Yeah, I could share you historic. It's high. It ranges from 60 to 100 trees, 120 trees, depending. Some of that is driven by curb.
Oh, the other thing I need to mention is, not only have we had a legacy of repairing our sidewalks a certain way, but a lot of the trees you look at now are either trees planted in the 30s, 40s, or trees planted in the 70s. We had a big wave of planting after the elms were removed. I've heard a lot of stories about the decision-making that the forestry department made then, and including planting a tree on private property just to get a tree there, but the private property, the owner lives there still and had the expectation or was led to believe that we would manage that tree even though it was on private property. The other thing is a lot of bad planting decisions were made. If you think about the 100 block of Fellows from Harvard to Genesee, 2-foot wide sidewalks. When I started, there were a half a dozen trees on that block, big trees. We don't plant in 2 to 4 foot wide tree lawns anymore. It's not a resolvable conflict. It does not make sense. We're guaranteed to blow up that sidewalk, and the trees don't fit in that space well, just for cars to drive by, people to walk by. And so we have a lot of narrow tree lawns with trees too big for the space to begin with. And we've paid a lot of attention to that as we've been doing, excuse me, as we've been doing all the planting we've been doing the last decade.
So this may not be you to answer this, Steve, but when there is a conflict between the forestry department and DPW, who wins out? If you think a tree should stay and DPW says it should go, how does that resolve?
Well, that is more about what can be done. Usually I offer a solution that you can't, like curving onto private property. We can't do that. But I mean, what's the transactional solution to use that space? That's a big deal because that's a long drawn out thing. Another one are things that were proposed here that we haven't considered before. We're not like just removing only the concrete, and we've never addressed that before that way.
So when we see curves now, is that because there's enough room in the right of way to a curve?
Yes, we got to have right of way inside the sidewalk. I would say I probably addressed that the wrong way when I said conflict. Usually it's me suggesting things that contractually we can't do, and then they're sanity checking me because I'm just thinking how can we keep the tree around, and then I have Chris Ettinger saying no, Steve, we can't do that. Our contracts aren't structured that way. So that's something we'll look at now. How can we do things like temporary repair? If our contract requires a warranty, if the contractor has to warranty that sidewalk for 2 years, then they're not going to want to do temporary repair, right? So it's built into the work they do. They're not going to do, and it's not fair for us to ask them to do so.
So how do we adjust that, Steve?
That's something that we have to create language for.
So that's something we would amend, Corey, or amend in the legislation? I mean, we could have the law department.
Yeah, I don't think it's legislation. I think it's more around how we structure our contracts. So contracts have to go out well in advance of any time we do work. So the things we're evaluating right now are not in our current contract. But we want to work to evaluate them, because if they do work, we'll put them in the next contract. So it just takes time to fold these things in.
And Steve, you said 150 or 160 trees?
No, 80 to 100.
80 to 100? Yeah, I mean, all of us here were proponents of the municipal sidewalk program, and all of us, it was a little bit of controversial, as you remember. So, we're just here to try to help you work out what we need to do to go forward. That's all. And I appreciate this, Corey, by you putting this all together, because maybe this is probably a little overdue as far as looking at the program and where we need to go here. So You know, and I want to be, before I go on, I want to recognize that our former city councilor, Gene Kestner, who's a committed walker like I am, is here. And and when you mentioned Fellows Ave, I think Gene lives on Fellows Ave, as a matter of fact. So there are situations, so when we have, my main question is, when we put these new trees in that we all approved, we're going to like put them in places where we won't run into these situations.
Right tree in the right place.
Steve, is that?
It's more about how big does the tree get at maturity? And so.
That's what
based
you
on
know.
What that's going to be, is that the right place to put it?
Yeah.
What Neil said, right tree, right place.
Okay.
We got to match, you know, when we don't have utility poles on the side of the street, we like to plant tall growing shade trees. But just because there are no utilities on that side and National Grid won't trim over there, it doesn't mean we should necessarily put a shade tree there unless we know that there's going to be space for the roots and the base of the tree. Because it's not just the roots. The base of the tree gets wider and bigger and taller as the tree ages. They can grow right up over the sidewalk and push the sidewalk down, actually, and lift it up at other ends. So it's got to fit in there 30 years from now. We just got to think
And we
ahead.
have a flexibility, the selection of trees that.
Oh,
work.
there's enormous, yeah. We plant like 50 different trees, yeah.
So if it didn't fit there
Yep.
was some sort of tree that would fit somewhere that maybe that resident would.
And alternatively, if it's a narrow tree lawn and we want to create a bridge under the sidewalk for roots, there's material we can put under for that. It costs more, and we got to factor that in to make sure, can we afford this? Is this trying to optimize how much sidewalk we're going to put in and what's reasonable to do?
Okay. Thanks, Councilor Green.
I'm good.
But when you say temporary, what does temporary mean? What's the amount of time that temporary is a good?
I know that in Rochester, their expectation is that their temporary repairs last 2 to 5 years. And that's because they're leaving the root under there. They made a decision a long time ago that they would have a system-wide approach that they would do this. If you're leaving a root there, you're going to get a heaved sidewalk, and then you have to have the ability to go back to that and monitor the situation.
So we still not stuck, I shouldn't use the word stuck, but how we doing as far as hiring other people to help Chris out here and you out, Neil, and everybody else?
We're moving.
I love when you say that, we're moving.
We're
You mean,
moving.
how far away from the move are we, actually?
We're in the interview stage, so there's been a good amount of moving.
I will also mention, Neil didn't add his title, but he was recently named the director of the Bureau of Special Projects. So Neil is going to be the point person for this project. So that was the main hire that we needed to make. And now we're moving on to the planners that are going to help support the program. And I think we have interviews this week tomorrow, to get those folks in place.
So what do the planners do? They just decide where we're going?
Yeah, I'll leave that to the newly named director of the Bureau of Special Projects.
Mr. Director, you heard my question.
So, yeah, planners are fine, but we also need some doers as well. So we're going to have folks helping us with planning this out. We need to be in a place where we can predict where we're going to be years in advance. And right now, we have a good idea, but we hit the ground running here on July 1st. So in future years, we want to know exactly where we're going to be. That helps us with our bidding process. It helps us with our anticipated costs. Very important. The planner can help us do that. We also are evaluating another inspector type position to assist in the field, help get things done, help measure, help check in.
So we'll have Chris and one other person doing all the inspecting. Do you think that's going to fill the need, or what?
We're going to start with an additional, and there'll probably be a bit of a gadget person. But if we need another, we're open to it. And, the more the merrier. If it gets us good sidewalks in place and saves trees, it's a position well spent.
Because Corey, I'm pretty sure I've been on record as far as our departments that do all the implementation. You know, we pass all this money, we got all this ARPA funding. I know engineering needs people, the law department needs people. I am in favor of hiring people if we get, I mean, we have this money, but it doesn't do us any good unless we're able to put it in the pipeline. We
Yeah.
need facilitators.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, and that's why I think, you know, we get the people in place that we think we need now, we see how it goes, and then we add, you know, I think similar to the sidewalk snow removal program, you know, right now we plan on having one contractor. If we find that that doesn't make sense and we need to pivot, then we'll do that. And I think it's true with the staff here. We didn't want to hire a whole fleet of people and find that we only really need about half of them. So I think to your point, Counselor, you know, we're going to be keeping a close eye on the staffing. And, you know, we also have built into the municipal sidewalk program ordinance that the Commissioner of Public Works will be reporting to the council as part of the budget presentation each year what we've accomplished. And I think that helps to keep transparency in the forefront and for council to have a line of sight into the progress that we're making each year so that we can have a conversation about, is the staffing adequate? What kind of challenges are we facing in terms of materials? Do we need to revisit the fees? You know, all the different things that we're going to have to keep an eye on as the program moves forward. So we built that transparency into the program as well, so that it's a requirement of the commissioner to make a report to the council and to the public about the progress of each year of the sidewalk program.
Former Councilor Kestner, do you want to say something?
Come right up here, Gene. Do you want to sit in one of these seats like the old days?
Let's bring back the old days.
I'm very jealous that everybody's able to sit in a chair and not move around. I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking this action. I know it probably had some controversy and all that, but thank you. It's something that we were reluctant to do forever, and it'll move us forward. I have a couple of comments, and I'd like to know one thing of how do you get involved in the process, because there are a lot of us, like my neighbors who walk their dogs the same time I walk mine. We have observations about things. One of them is we are disgusted with all the trees that come down, and we didn't know they were coming down. If somebody explained to us why that tree was coming down, we go, oh, I see. But it's like, how is the community notified? On my block, just at the end, it's at Lennox and Fellows, this big tree came down, and I thought, why did they do that? Now, I'm sure you got an answer, but, you know, it's our neighborhood. It's yours too, but it's our neighborhood. And so I would like to have an opportunity, or let people know how they can become involved, how they can find out when action is going to happen. And there are several things, but the other thing that I wanted to say is it's not just the sidewalk, that there are so many branches that, especially with all the ticks and things, it becomes a problem for people. And I know that our sidewalk ordinance probably says you're supposed to clear the foliage around, but lots and lots of people don't. And I don't mind suggesting that they do it, but I don't know if I'm standing on solid ground by saying, you know, the city sidewalk ordinance says it's not just the sidewalk you have to clear, but you have to, you know, you can't have, and I love the gardens, but they sometimes get out of control. I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I look forward for an opportunity to see more about what we're doing. Oh, I forgot one last thing. You talk about, I understand why you don't put the tall trees on the wire side. I happen to live on the wire side. But the kinds of trees that are often being put in instead of the big trees that come out that Niagara Mohawk will not service, which we need to talk to the PSC about, is they are shrubs, especially those, I call them Japanese lilacs. I don't know what they are, but you know, it's like, what is this? You take down a maple and you put in a shrub? And that's what it's, you know, I don't know what to recommend, but I would like to see the list of what you have to offer and encourage people to ask for a tree that grows a little bit taller on the wired side of the street. Because the trees make this city. They just make the city. And if you remember, I might be the only one old enough, but the Labor Day storm, we lost 33,000 trees. And, you know, they weren't really old trees that fell down. They were in their prime. Okay, thank you.
Gene, I was old enough to.
Two quick points. Thank you, former Councilor Kestner. Two quick things. One, our office is in the process of, as part of the budget that the council approved, thank you very much for this, a infrastructure PIO to really help us better communicate. Obviously Parks has a very robust communication strategy, and Downs does a phenomenal job in making sure that everybody's in the loop on what's happening at Parks. The police department, the fire department are really great at pushing out information. And when you think about DPW, there are a few departments that impact people's quality of life in every day than DPW, and we don't really have a person in place we have so many doers that we don't necessarily have the infrastructure in place to communicate that. But we're in the process, I think they're starting sometime in the next month or so, of an infrastructure PIO, because we really want to increase the amount of communication to the point made about what's happening in your neighborhood, what streets are being plowed this year, what sidewalks are being installed, what are we doing to the parks in your neighborhood, all the things that we're doing that we think are of value to folks but are obviously going to impact their day-to-day. We want to be much more proactive in communicating that to folks so that it's not a surprise that you show up one day and I think Kevin Hunter and his team does a great job in doing the door knockers, doing the postings, but obviously there are things that if it's not right outside your front door, you might not know about it. And so we really want to increase that. And the other plug that I need to make, and I know that Councilor Hogan, you had raised this, that I think we need to communicate more to the council, is the launch of Sierra City Line and the app that people can download on their phone, Sierra City Line. It's very easy. You can submit, I think this tree needs to be trimmed. I have a concern about this sidewalk. My trash didn't get picked up, or, something positive you want to share with us. The whole gamut of service requests are available on that app, and we really encourage folks to use that app. And obviously if you want to call, you're not into phones, you don't have a mobile phone, that's totally fine too. We're still taking phone calls. We've got a great team, a largely new team down at City Line, located in City Hall now. It's also on the website. It'll be part of our revamped website. So really trying to push the new system that we have that supports Sierra City Line. That's all.
Thank you. So two quick things. The process that exists right now, I don't think this is the case, but it feels sometimes informal, right? Where it'll happen and then the tree goes away, and for a neighbor's perspective. So then, if someone calls us or a citizen calls City Hall directly, do we have the documentation or the ability to kind of respond to them and say, here's why I came down, because we couldn't curve it, because we couldn't the explanation that someone like Jean's would call and ask me for? Do we have that written down somewhere, or some ability to be able to just respond?
Speaking to the tree on the corner of Fellows and Lennox, which I, of course, had a thought bubble full of, I'm going to hear it from a lot of people. I walk down that street every day. The reason that tree was removed, just to speak to it, was the reason we remove trees is safety or infrastructure conflict. We don't remove a healthy tree unless there's unless repair of infrastructure forces us to. But the first thing with hazards is there a target, and then is there a defect? And that tree had a defect in every single branch, and the resident, we got a call from across the street about concerns, and we went and looked at that tree, and there's nowhere to prune to. Everything had been pruned out. All the interior branches had been pruned. There's only leaves on the end, nothing to prune back to, and every branch had rot in it. To spend money pruning that tree is folly. A poor distribution of our very limited resources for pruning. In terms of notification, we only notify the property owners. That's just been our practice. And we don't have a shade tree committee that we communicate those kind of things. That used to be, that's something on the books in the ordinance, but I don't know if ever in the last 30 years there's been a shade tree committee. I can't speak to that. Maybe some of you know. But either way, I mean, we're making our decisions to minimize the city's liability. I mean, that's our first order of business and we have very few payouts related to tree incidents.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not interested in second guessing every tree that comes down.
right.
It's more procedurally, do we have, if someone were to call and say, there's an 80-year-old tree on my street, now my quality of life is less because we took it down, that we're able to say, yep, we have this document, we
Right.
know exactly why.
I mean, we have that in our notes when we evaluate the trees. And there was on 7th North Street, there was one of the largest red oaks in the city. And every year, it had shifted even more this year. So I went to every single property and left a notice and talked to many people as I could, saying, look, this is what we're about to do and here's why. I didn't think of doing it with that tree because that tree was, when I thought with my trained eye, when I look at that tree, I think this tree is in bad shape. But that other tree, you couldn't observe what the issues were other than it was starting to shift underground. So that is a judgment call on my part when I decide to do a more broad-based outreach.
So then I guess broadly, let's say a constituent does call, how do we route that? Do we have them
Any
email
tree
you? How do
question
we-
goes to me.
Okay.
When it comes to tree sidewalk issue, I mean, with the decision of, I mean, I'll explain why we removed the tree and where it goes from there.
Okay.
I can't say. I mean, when I removed the tree for sidewalk, it's because of root loss. Like on Dakota or Montana, whatever that was, where there were 2 trees there. They were too close to the sidewalk and the sidewalk got wider. And they hate root loss, the lindens.
Yeah.
So I removed those.
So the other recommendation I was going to make, not to put this on Councilor Hogan, but to me, it may make sense, given our investment in trees coming out of ARPA and our planting, to do like a once a year, here's what happened this year with trees, here's what we added, here's what we took down. If you guys think that makes sense. I think it's just something that sometimes we just have never had a focus on it, but it's such an important thing that if we were to just kind of do that periodic check-in, it's probably valuable.
And
Absolutely.
It'll probably be part of when the federal auditors come anyways to say what we did, that's going to be part of it. And Steve, not to belabor this point, Councilor Green's point, but there is documentation. Can we just put that documentation together that the tree on Dakota Street was removed because of this? So we don't have to keep on calling you. Like you mentioned 7th
Yeah.
North Street, that large red oak, maybe in the 2nd Council District. You're gonna
Did
mess
you
my
see it?
red.
Do you know
red
what I was
oak.
talking about?
You're gonna mess my red oak here.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the type of thing we'll get calls on.
Yeah.
You know, so if there's just so we can go, instead of calling you, we can just go to somebody and find that out.
We're hardwired for that because we use our database to drive our documentation. So we can look and see what the reason was. We're not doing the extensive ISA form that, there's 2 pages back to back. We don't do that in our evaluations. We just call what we see and we mark the reason why, and it's clear to know why.
Just one sentence.
Yeah, right, yep.
Just so we got an explanation, so.
To be clear, are you asking that, you want to see that for every tree we remove, or?
Well, you know what, at that one sentence, yeah. Every
So
tree-
like
what-
the end of the year, this is what we did
I'm not
wrong.
talking about park trees, I'm talking about trees on streets. So the 80 trees that you said?
Well,
if there was
that's for
documentation-
sidewalks, but we remove probably 600 a year.
Well, no, then sidewalks.
Yeah, right. Yeah, understood. Yeah, we can do that for sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything else?
Just one question. Another thing that comes up very, very often from our constituents is in the sidewalk repairs, or if we're putting new, what's the process to select who goes first? If there's any yet.
Do you mean throughout the course of the season or on a street, who goes first?
Throughout the course, yeah.
Throughout the course, yeah. I don't know if we, go ahead.
Yeah, so we worked closely with the Metropolitan Planning Organization, SMTC. They put together a pedestrian heat map for us, and it has specific rankings for certain blocks. They don't get down to the parcel area, and that is not a complete data set right now, so they're still working on it. They're still walking the streets, gathering that data for us. They're literally out there walking with iPads and measuring, and
Okay.
it's great that they're doing it for us. But we do have some sense of the priority areas as it relates to how we developed our snow clearing program. So we know where the streets are that are important areas for us to target. We translate that to the sidewalk program. So if it's important enough for us to be plowing it, it's definitely important enough for us
start
to be
there.
getting to it the first couple of years in the program. And obviously, we want to build out our planning process, and we're working with the MPO on that. But that's where we are right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay. All right, we'll close it out. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.